when my son told me I wouldn't be welcome at his home for Christmas. I smiled, walked to my car, and made a phone call. Before New Year's arrived, their mortgage support had vanished. But that was merely the opening move in my strategy. Sometimes justice demands action, and arrogance requires correction. What unfolded next will leave you speechless. But first, please subscribe to our channel and share in the comments where you're tuning in from. I never thought I would be spending Christmas Eve morning feeding birds alone in my backyard. The cardinal that visits my feeder every day looked at me with what I swear was sympathy. Sarah used to say animals could sense when humans were hurting. She had been gone 3 years now, but her words still echoed in the quiet corners of our house like whispered prayers from another time. The house felt too big without her laughter filling the rooms. Every Christmas decoration I had carefully arranged seemed to mock me now. The stockings hung by the fireplace, mine, David's, Emma's, and the 2 little ones for Tommy and Lucy. 5 stockings for what was supposed to be a family gathering that would never happen. Each one perfectly positioned, just as Sarah would have done, maintaining the illusion that tradition could survive neglect. I had been planning this Christmas for months, maybe even longer than that. Sarah always said our home was where the family gathered, no matter what storms raged outside or inside people's hearts. She would spend weeks preparing, making sure every detail was perfect, from the exact placement of ornaments to the temperature of the wassail. This year, I had tried to honor that tradition with the devotion of a monk tending a sacred ritual. I bought the exact gifts the grandchildren had mentioned wanting during our last real conversation months ago. I even learned to make Sarah's famous apple cinnamon bread from the recipe she had left in her careful handwriting, practicing until my hands remembered her movements. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon and hope. My phone buzzed with a text from David, the sound cutting through the morning quiet like a blade. "Dad, just to confirm, we're doing Christmas with Emma's family this year. Different traditions, you understand." No apology, no invitation to join them, just a cold statement delivered like he was canceling a business meeting, efficient and emotionless. I smiled, set the phone down, and walked to my office, each step measured and purposeful. The filing cabinet in the corner held more than just old tax returns and insurance papers. It contained the architecture of our family's financial life, the invisible scaffolding that had supported David's world for longer than he knew or cared to acknowledge. In the bottom drawer, behind folders marked Utilities and Medical, was a thick manila envelope labeled Family Financial Overview. Sarah had insisted I organize everything after her diagnosis with the methodical precision of someone who knew time was becoming precious. She always said money should be transparent in families, like looking through clear glass where nothing could hide in shadows. That night, I found another envelope in Sarah's things, tucked inside her jewelry box between the pearls her mother had given her and the simple gold band I had placed on her finger 43 years ago. My name was written on it in her careful script with a note. "Open when you understand the difference between helping and enabling." The distinction had never been clearer than it was in that moment, sitting in our bedroom surrounded by the artifacts of a marriage that had taught me more about love than I had ever expected to learn. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper with Sarah's final piece of guidance. "Walter, true love sometimes requires us to step back and watch someone we care about face the natural consequences of their choices. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do, but it's also the most important. Don't save David from his decisions. Help him learn to make better ones." The weight of her wisdom settled over me like a blessing and a burden combined. I understood now that every monthly transfer, every emergency payment, every quiet intervention had been preventing David from learning lessons he needed to master. I had been so busy being a safety net that I had forgotten to teach him how to avoid falling in the first place. I walked through the house that night, turning off lights and checking locks with the methodical care of someone preparing for a long journey. In the morning, I would begin the difficult work of loving my son enough to let him stand on his own, even if it meant watching him stumble. Sarah's voice echoed in my memory. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to discover their own strength. By dawn, I knew exactly what needed to be done. The phone call I would make wouldn't be about revenge or punishment. It would be about restoration of boundaries, of respect, and ultimately of the kind of relationship that could only exist between equals who chose to honor each other rather than taking each other for granted. The drive to David's house took exactly 18 minutes through neighborhoods that grew progressively more affluent with each turn. I had made this trip countless times over the years, usually carrying gifts, groceries, or tools to help with some household project that somehow always required my assistance. Today, I carried only a small wrapped box and a heart full of what I told myself was hope, though deep down, I knew better. The familiar route felt different this time, like retracing steps through a landscape that had fundamentally changed while appearing exactly the same. Their neighborhood had always intimidated me slightly with its manicured perfection. Manicured lawns stretched like green carpets between houses that looked like they belonged in magazines rather than being lived in by real families. Every mailbox was identical, every driveway swept clean, every flower bed arranged with mathematical precision. David's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, its windows glowing warmly against the December afternoon like a picture postcard of domestic bliss. The warm light spilling from those windows seemed to mock my approach, promising inclusion while preparing exclusion. I could hear laughter from inside as I approached the front door, each note of joy hitting me like small physical blows. The sound stopped me cold on the threshold. Not just any laughter, the delighted squeals of my grandchildren, Tommy and Lucy. They were here. They were having Christmas, celebrating the holiday we had always shared, and I had been deliberately excluded from what should have been our family tradition. The realization settled in my stomach like swallowed glass. Through the large front window, I glimpsed fragments of a scene that should have included me. Wrapping paper scattered on hardwood floors, the glow of Christmas tree lights, small hands reaching for presents. The tableau was perfect except for my absence, complete except for the grandfather who had been edited out of the family portrait. I knocked on the door, adjusting my wool coat and checking my appearance one final time in the reflection of the brass door knocker. The door opened, and David's face appeared in the gap. Not wide enough to invite me in, just wide enough to talk, like a security chain conversation with an unwelcome salesman. His expression cycled through surprise, guilt, and finally settled on defensive irritation. "Dad?" His voice carried the tone someone uses when they find an unexpected package on their doorstep, puzzled, slightly annoyed, wondering how to dispose of it efficiently. "What are you doing here?" Behind him, I caught glimpses of a beautifully decorated Christmas tree, wrapped presents underneath in carefully coordinated colors, and Emma's parents sitting comfortably on the sofa like honored guests. Emma appeared behind David, her face flushing when she saw me, the color rising in her cheeks, like guilt made visible. She wore a new sweater I didn't recognize, something expensive-looking with subtle designer details that spoke of a lifestyle I had apparently been subsidizing without appreciation. "I brought gifts for the children," I said, holding up the small box. I thought perhaps I could say hello. David shifted uncomfortably, not moving aside to let me enter. "Dad, we talked about this. Emma's family is here, and we're doing their traditions this year. It's just different." Through the gap in the door, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Tommy was wearing a new sweater, expensive-looking, with a designer label visible at the collar. Lucy was playing with what appeared to be the latest tablet device. On the coffee table sat several bottles of wine that I recognized as costing more than most people spent on groceries in a week. "Those are lovely gifts the children received," I said carefully. Emma stepped forward, her voice artificially bright. "Oh yes, we had such a wonderful morning. The kids were so spoiled." She paused, seeming to realize what she had said. "I mean, they got everything they wanted." I nodded slowly, my eyes taking in more details. New furniture in the living room, a television mounted on the wall that was easily twice the size of mine. David himself was wearing a watch I had never seen before, something that gleamed gold in the light from their entryway chandelier. "Well," I said, extending the gift box toward David, "perhaps you could give this to them later." David took the box without really looking at it. "Sure, Dad, thanks. We should do dinner soon, after the holidays, when things calm down." The dismissal was polite but absolute. I had been reduced to a future obligation, a checkbox on a to-do list that would probably never get checked. As I walked back to my car, I heard Emma's voice through the door, speaking to someone inside. "I know it's awkward, but David's handling it well. We can't keep enabling the dependency forever." Dependency? The word hit me like a physical blow. I sat in my car for several minutes, staring at their house through the windshield that was beginning to fog with my breath. Through the large front window, I could see my grandchildren playing, their faces bright with Christmas joy. Emma's parents were being included in every moment I was being denied. The contrast was sharp enough to cut. My phone buzzed. A text from David. "Thanks for understanding, Dad. This is just easier for everyone." Easier for everyone except me. I looked at the message for a long moment, then something shifted inside me. A strange calm descended, the kind that comes when a difficult decision finally becomes clear. I smiled, not from happiness, but from the relief of knowing exactly what needed to be done. I started the engine and began the drive home, but instead of anger, I felt something else settling in my chest. Clarity. Sarah's words echoed in my mind. Love without boundaries creates spoiled children, even when they're adults. Halfway home, I pulled into the parking lot of a small office complex and took out my phone. The number I needed was already in my contacts, John Peterson, our family attorney. But more importantly, the man who held the legal keys to every financial arrangement that had made David's comfortable life possible. The phone rang twice before his familiar voice answered. "Walter, Merry Christmas. Is everything all right?" "John," I said, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to set in motion, "I need you to prepare termination papers for the family fund co-signing agreements. All of them." There was a pause. "Walter, are you certain? This will affect their mortgage, insurance, everything we've set up over the years?" "I'm certain. How quickly can it be done?" "If you're sure about this, I can have the papers ready by tomorrow." "But Walter, this is irreversible once we file the notices." I looked back toward David's neighborhood, invisible now behind winter trees and the curve of the road. "That's exactly what I'm counting on, John. Irreversible." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my car for another few minutes. One phone call, just as the situation had demanded. It was time for some boundaries. Back at home, I spread Sarah's letter across the desk again, reading her words with new understanding. She had known this day would come. Somehow, my wife had seen what I had been too blind to recognize. That unconditional financial support without mutual respect was not love. It was enabling. The family fund documents told a story I had never forced myself to examine closely. 15 years of monthly transfers. Insurance premiums paid automatically. Property taxes handled through our joint account. Emergency car repairs, medical bills, and what David had always called temporary help that somehow never became temporary. I pulled out my calculator and started adding. The numbers were staggering, not just the mortgage co-signing, but everything else. The family fund had disbursed over $4,000 monthly to David's household for the past 3 years alone, $60,000 annually. The money I had convinced myself was just helping the family. Sarah's instructions were precise. First, send a formal notification. Give him 30 days to acknowledge the support and commit to a respectful relationship. If he chooses to ignore this opportunity, activate the independence protocol. I opened my laptop and began typing a letter. Not emotional, not accusatory, just factual. Dear David, effective January 1st, The automatic disbursements from the family fund will be suspended pending a family financial discussion. This includes mortgage assistance, insurance premium coverage, and emergency support transfers. I am requesting a meeting on December 30th to discuss transition arrangements and establish new terms for any future assistance. This assistance has totaled approximately $48,000 annually and requires acknowledgement and mutual respect to continue. If you do not respond within 72 hours, I will assume you prefer complete financial independence, and all support will be permanently discontinued. Respectfully, your father, Walter. I read the letter 3 times, checking for any trace of anger or hurt. Sarah had taught me that dignity required restraint. This was not revenge. This was the restoration of proper boundaries. The envelope felt heavy as I sealed it. I drove to the post office and sent it certified mail, requiring signature confirmation. The postal clerk, a young woman with kind eyes, wished me a Merry Christmas as she handed me the receipt. "Merry Christmas to you too," I replied, though I wondered if Christmas would ever feel merry again. That evening, I sat in Sarah's chair and opened the cassette player she had left in our bedroom closet. Her voice filled the room, recorded during those final weeks when she knew time was running short. "Walter, if you're hearing this, David has forgotten the little boy who used to cry every night when I was in the hospital. Do you remember? He was 8 years old, and he told you, 'Daddy, don't ever leave me like Mommy might.' That scared little boy is still inside him, but fear makes people cruel sometimes." I closed my eyes, remembering those nights. David clinging to me, afraid that everyone he loved would disappear. Had my constant financial support been an attempt to prevent him from ever feeling that fear again? Sarah's voice continued. "His cruelty comes from fear, not hate. But Walter, fear is not an excuse for disrespect. Love him enough to let him stand on his own." The next morning, I received the delivery confirmation. David had signed for the letter at 10:37 a.m. Now I waited. If he didn't call at all, it would confirm everything she had suspected about the man our son had become. My phone remained silent all day. No call, no text, no acknowledgement that he had even received the letter. By evening, I knew David had made his choice. He preferred to ignore the support rather than acknowledge it. Pride, as Sarah had predicted, had won over wisdom. I opened my laptop and sent a brief email to our family attorney, John Peterson. "John, I need to discuss options for discontinuing co-signed financial obligations. Please call at your earliest convenience." His response came within an hour. "Walter, this sounds serious. I can meet tomorrow morning. Are you certain about this course of action?" I looked around the empty house, at the Christmas tree I had decorated for guests who would never come, at the family photos that now felt like monuments to something that had died without my noticing. "Yes," I typed back, "I'm certain." John Peterson's office smelled of leather and old law books. He had been our family attorney for 20 years, handling everything from Sarah's will to property disputes with neighbors. When I walked in that Tuesday morning, his expression was grim. "Walter, I've reviewed the documents you sent over. The family fund structure is comprehensive." He spread papers across his mahogany desk. David's mortgage, insurance policies, even his children's college savings accounts. You've been the invisible foundation of their entire financial life. I nodded, studying the legal documents that made it all official. Co-signatures dating back 15 years, trust fund disbursements, emergency credit lines with my name as guarantor. Sarah set most of this up. She wanted to help, but she also wanted protection. Protection? John raised an eyebrow. Clauses that allow immediate termination if the support is not acknowledged, or if the relationship becomes disrespectful. I pointed to page 7 of the family fund agreement. Sarah made David sign this when he turned 30. He agreed to annual financial reviews and mutual respect requirements. John whistled softly. He's never honored the review requirement, has he? Not once. He treats the money like it's an entitlement. Well, legally, you have every right to discontinue support. The question is timing. If you pull mortgage assistance immediately, they'll face foreclosure within 90 days. I thought about Tommy and Lucy, their bright faces on Christmas morning. What if I give him one final opportunity? We could send formal notice through my office. Legal letterhead carries more weight. Gives him 30 days to either acknowledge the support and commit to respect or face complete financial independence. I agreed, and John drafted the letter that afternoon. Official, unavoidable, the kind of communication that couldn't be ignored. The call came at 7:15 that evening, after 23 missed calls that I had watched accumulate on my phone screen throughout the day. I had spent the afternoon in my garden, pruning roses that wouldn't bloom until spring, letting each call go unanswered while I considered exactly what I would say when I finally decided to pick up. David's voice was tight with panic. "Dad, what the hell is this lawyer letter? Are you actually threatening to destroy my family over Christmas dinner?" I kept my voice calm. "I'm offering you a choice, son. Acknowledge the support you've received and treat me with respect, or prove you're truly independent." Independent? Dad, you can't just pull the rug out from under us. We have children. We have responsibilities. You have responsibilities you've been ignoring. When did you last say thank you for the mortgage help? When did you last acknowledge that your lifestyle is built on my support? Silence. Then, "I didn't realize you were keeping score." I wasn't keeping score, David. I was keeping records. Sarah insisted on transparency, remember? Look, this is insane. You're upset about Christmas, I get it, but threatening our home isn't the answer. I felt something shift inside me. His tone was wrong. No apology, no recognition, just irritation that I had dared to call in 15 years of unreturned kindness. "David, I'm not threatening anything. I'm simply stopping what you clearly don't value." The line went quiet for so long I thought he had hung up. Finally, "Emma's going to lose her mind when she finds out about this." "Emma doesn't know about the family fund?" Another pause. "She knows some of it, not all of it." My blood chilled. What does she know exactly? She thinks most of the support is from my work bonuses. I didn't want her to feel like we were charity cases. Charity cases. The words hung in the air between us like a confession of shame. My son had been lying to his wife about where their security came from, taking credit for money I provided. "So Emma believes you've been unusually successful at work?" Something like that. His voice was getting smaller. "Dad, you can't tell her. It would destroy everything." "Everything built on a lie is already destroyed, son. You just haven't admitted it yet." I hung up, my hands shaking slightly. David hadn't just been ungrateful. He had been actively deceptive, allowing his wife to believe in a fiction of their prosperity. 2 days later, the bank called. David had apparently tried to refinance the mortgage without telling me, only to discover that the family fund disbursements were considered essential income for loan qualification. Without them, his actual salary couldn't support the property. "Mr. Walter, we need to discuss the cosigner situation," the loan officer said. Mr. David seemed surprised by some of the financial arrangements. That afternoon, Emma called. Her voice was strained, different from the polished politeness I usually heard. "Walter, I think we need to talk. David told me about the family fund. I had no idea how much you've been helping us." "Would you like to meet for coffee, Emma?" "Yes. Can we do it tomorrow, without David?" I agreed, though I suspected this conversation would change everything. Emma had always been the practical one in their marriage. If she finally understood the reality of their financial situation, David's carefully constructed fiction would crumble. That night, I found another envelope in Sarah's things, tucked inside her jewelry box. My name was written on it in her careful script, with a note. "Open when Emma asks to talk alone." Sarah had predicted this moment too. Somehow she had known that the truth would eventually demand its own reckoning. Sarah's letter was shorter than the others, but its words cut deeper. "Walter, if Emma is asking to meet alone, she's discovered David's lies. She's a good woman, trapped in a bad situation. Be gentle, but truthful. She deserves to know what her marriage is really built on. Remember, you're not destroying their family. You're revealing what was already broken. I arrived at the coffee shop early, choosing a corner table away from other customers. Emma walked in exactly on time, her usual polished appearance slightly frayed around the edges. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sitting across from me with careful precision. "I need to understand what's been happening with our finances." I had brought a folder of documents, but I left it closed on the table. "What has David told you?" Emma's laugh was bitter. Apparently, very little that was true. He admitted the family fund exists, but he's been creative about the details. She paused, staring at her untouched coffee. "Walter, I thought David was incredibly successful at work. The bonuses, the raises, the financial security we've enjoyed. I was so proud of him." "He is talented, Emma. His actual salary is quite respectable. But not enough for our lifestyle." It wasn't a question. I opened the folder and slid a single document across the table. "This is last year's family fund statement, the total disbursements to your household." Emma's face went pale as she read. $48,000? Last year alone? She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. "Walter, this is more than my entire salary as a teacher. David has been receiving this level of support for 3 years. Before that, it was smaller amounts, but still substantial. The down payment for our house, David said he had been saving for years. That came from the family fund as well." Emma put her head in her hands. "The vacation to Europe last summer, the new cars, Tommy's private school tuition." She was speaking more to herself than to me. None of it was real. None of it was ours. I reached across the table and gently touched her arm. "Emma, you worked hard for your family. You taught those children, raised Tommy and Lucy with love and values. That part was entirely real." She looked up, tears in her eyes. "But David let me believe we were successful. He let me think he was providing this life for us through his own abilities." "Why do you think he did that?" "Pride, I suppose, or shame." She wiped her eyes with a napkin. "Walter, there's something else, something David doesn't know I found." She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot of a banking app. "David has been using a credit line against our house. He's borrowed $45,000 over the past year." My stomach dropped. "For what?" "Day trading, stock investments. He's been gambling with borrowed money, thinking he could make enough to become truly independent." Her voice cracked. "He's lost most of it. We're not just dependent on your support, Walter. We're drowning without it." I sat back, absorbing this new information. David hadn't just been ungrateful and deceptive. He had been actively endangering his family's security while hiding behind my financial safety net. "Does he know you found out about the trading?" "Not yet. I've been gathering information, trying to understand how bad it really is." Emma looked directly at me, her voice steadying. "Walter, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I nodded. "If you withdraw the family fund support, how long do we have before we lose everything?" I had already asked John Peterson this question. 3 months, maybe 4 if David gets a second job. The mortgage payments alone will consume most of his actual salary. Emma closed her eyes. "And the children's college funds?" "Those are separate trusts. They're protected regardless." "Thank God." She opened her eyes and looked at me with something I hadn't seen before, respect mixed with gratitude. "Walter, I owe you an enormous apology. I encouraged David to establish boundaries with you because I thought you were being controlling. I had no idea you were being generous. Emma, you were protecting your family with the information you had. No, I was being selfish. I wanted David to be the man I thought he was, rather than seeing the man he actually is." She paused, gathering herself. "What do you need from us to continue the support?" I had been dreading this conversation, but her directness made it easier. Honesty, acknowledgement, respect, and David needs to stop the gambling immediately. What if he won't? The question hung between us like a sword waiting to fall. Emma was asking me to consider the possibility that her husband might choose pride and addiction over his family's security. Then you'll need to decide what's best for you and the children. Emma nodded slowly. I was afraid you'd say that. She stood up, then sat back down. Walter, there's one more thing. The children have been asking about you. David told them you moved away. My heart clenched. They think I moved away? Tommy asked me if you were angry with him. Lucy drew you a picture for Christmas, but David told her there was no point in sending it because you wouldn't want it. The cruelty of it took my breath away. David hadn't just excluded me from Christmas. He had erased me from his children's understanding of reality. Emma, I would treasure anything those children made for me. She smiled through her tears. I know you would. That's why this is so heartbreaking. The family gathering at my brother Robert's house happened every New Year's weekend. Sarah and I had hosted it for 20 years until her illness made it impossible. This year, Robert had reluctantly agreed to take it on, mostly because our cousin Margaret insisted family traditions shouldn't die with individual members. I almost didn't go. The thought of facing extended family members who might have heard David's version of our conflict made my stomach tight with anxiety. But Emma had called the night before with an unexpected request. Walter, I think you should come to Robert's gathering, and I think you should bring documentation. Emma, I don't want to embarrass David publicly. David embarrassed himself when he lied to his wife and children. The family deserves to know the truth, especially if they're hearing his side of the story. She was right. David had already been making calls to family members, painting himself as the victim of an unreasonable and controlling father. Margaret had called me twice, suggesting I was being too harsh. Uncle Bob had left a voicemail about family forgiveness and moving past grudges. I arrived at Robert's house carrying a briefcase that felt heavier than it should. Inside were copies of the family fund statements, Sarah's letters, and the timeline of David's deceptions. Not weapons, but evidence. David was already there when I walked in, surrounded by sympathetic relatives. His face went pale when he saw me, but he recovered quickly, standing to give me a theatrical hug that felt like a performance for the room. Dad, I'm so glad you came. We need to put this whole misunderstanding behind us. Misunderstanding, as if 15 years of support had been accidentally overlooked. Margaret approached me with her usual diplomatic smile. Walter, dear, I'm sure you two can work this out. Family disputes are so painful, especially during the holidays. Margaret, I appreciate your concern, but I think there are some facts the family should understand before choosing sides. David's face tightened. Dad, please, can't we handle this privately? You made it public when you started calling family members with your version of events. I set my briefcase on Robert's dining room table. I think everyone deserves accurate information. The room grew quiet. Robert moved closer, his expression curious but cautious. Walter, what kind of information? I opened the briefcase and spread documents across the table. The family fund statements for the past 5 years, Sarah's instructions for the support program, and the timeline of David's acknowledgments. Uncle Bob picked up one of the statements, his eyebrows rising as he read. David, this shows over $40,000 annually. Is this accurate? David shifted uncomfortably. Dad helped us out sometimes. It wasn't that much. This document suggests otherwise. Bob passed the statement to Margaret, whose expression was changing from diplomatic concern to genuine surprise. David, Margaret said slowly, you told me your father was threatening to cut off Christmas gifts to the grandchildren. This looks like something much more substantial. Emma stepped forward from where she had been standing near the kitchen. I hadn't seen her come in. May I say something? David looked panicked. Emma, you don't need to. Yes, I do. Her voice was calm but firm. I need to set the record straight because I contributed to this problem. She addressed the room with the same directness she had used with me in the coffee shop. I encouraged David to establish independence from Walter because I thought Walter was being controlling. I had no idea the extent of the financial support we were receiving. I thought David was exceptionally successful at work. "Emma, don't," David pleaded. "David, they need to understand what really happened." She turned back to the family. Walter wasn't controlling. He was supporting us financially to a degree that basically subsidized our entire lifestyle. And when David excluded him from Christmas, Walter simply asked for acknowledgement and respect before continuing that support. The room was completely silent now. Margaret was studying the documents with the focus she usually reserved for church committee budgets. "David," Robert said quietly, "is this true?" David's facade was crumbling. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under. The expectations. I didn't want everyone to think I was a failure." "So you let us think your father was the problem?" Uncle Bob's voice carried disappointment that cut through the room like a blade. "I never meant for it to go this far." I finally spoke. "David, I found something else this week." I pulled out the final document from my briefcase. "A record of equity loans against your house. $45,000 borrowed for stock trading." Emma's sharp intake of breath was audible. I realized she hadn't told the family about the gambling yet. "You were using my financial support as security to borrow money for day trading, while telling your wife the money came from work bonuses, while excluding me from family gatherings because you were ashamed of my modest lifestyle." David sat down heavily, his face in his hands. "I was trying to make enough to be truly independent. I wanted to surprise everyone. Instead, you endangered your family's security and lied to everyone who cares about you." Margaret set down the documents and looked at David with profound sadness. "Oh, honey, what were you thinking?" The intervention I had never planned was happening organically. Family members who had come prepared to counsel me toward forgiveness were instead witnessing the collapse of a carefully constructed fiction. Emma moved to stand beside me. "Walter isn't the villain in this story. We are lucky to have someone who cared enough to support us and wise enough to recognize when that support was being taken for granted." David looked up, his eyes red. "So what happens now? Do I lose everything? Do my children become homeless because I made mistakes?" For the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely sorry for my son. Not sorry enough to enable him further, but sorry enough to offer him a path forward. "David, the support can continue, but only with complete honesty, acknowledgement, and a plan to address the gambling." "What kind of plan?" "Counseling, financial transparency, and time to rebuild the trust you've broken." Margaret nodded approvingly. "That sounds more than fair, Walter." David was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What if I can't do it? What if I can't change?" The question hung in the air like a confession of his deepest fear. Emma reached for his hand. "Then we'll face the consequences together," she said, "but we'll face them honestly." 3 weeks later, David appeared at my front door at 7 in the morning. I had been feeding the birds in my backyard when I heard the desperate knocking. Through the window, I could see his car parked crookedly in my driveway, as if he had arrived in a panic. I opened the door. My son. His clothes were wrinkled, his face unshaven, and his eyes held a desperation I hadn't seen since he was a child afraid of thunderstorms. "Dad, I need help." His voice cracked on the words. "Everything's falling apart." I stepped aside to let him in, noticing how his hands shook as he passed me. "What's happened, David?" "Emma left. She took the kids to her parents' house yesterday." He collapsed onto my sofa, putting his head in his hands. "The bank called this morning. Without the family fund payments, we're in default. They're starting foreclosure proceedings." I sat across from him, remembering Sarah's prediction that this moment would come around the 2-month mark. She had been eerily accurate about everything so far. "David, we discussed a path forward at Robert's house. Have you taken any of those steps?" He looked up, his eyes red with exhaustion and shame. I started the counseling. I've been to 3 sessions, but Dad, I can't stop thinking about the trading. Every time the market moves, I want to get back in. I keep telling myself I can win back what I lost. What does your counselor say about that? That it's addiction behavior, that I'm using financial risk to avoid dealing with deeper fears. He laughed bitterly. She says I'm afraid of being ordinary, afraid of not measuring up to some impossible standard. I thought about the scared 8-year-old who had once clung to me in the dark. What standard, son? Yours, I guess. You built this life from nothing. You provided for Sarah, for me, for everyone. I wanted to prove I could do the same without help. So you used my help to try to prove you didn't need my help? David looked at me with something approaching recognition. When you put it like that, it sounds insane. It sounds human. But David, proving yourself and providing for your family are 2 different things. One is about your ego. The other is about their security. He was quiet for several minutes, staring at his hands. Finally, Emma said she can't watch me destroy everything anymore. She said she loves me, but she won't enable me to hurt our children. I felt a surge of respect for my daughter-in-law. She's protecting them. That's what mothers do. But I've lost them, Dad. I've lost everything that matters. You've lost the illusion of control. But David, your children still love you. Emma still loves you. They're just waiting for you to choose them over the gambling. What if I can't? What if I'm too broken to fix? The question that had haunted him at the family gathering was back, but this time it carried genuine terror rather than self-pity. I stood up and walked to my office, returning with a manila envelope I had been saving for this moment. Inside were letters, dozens of them, in childish handwriting with crayon drawings. I found these in the guest room when Emma was helping me organize Sarah's things. I handed him the first letter. From Tommy. David's hands trembled as he read his son's words aloud. Dear Grandpa Walter, Daddy says you moved away, but I hope you come back soon. I miss our Saturday pancakes. Did I do something wrong? Love, Tommy. Tears were streaming down David's face now. Oh, God, what have I done to them? I handed him Lucy's drawing, a picture of 3 people fishing together, labeled me and Daddy and Grandpa Walter in purple crayon. They drew these 6 months ago, before Christmas. They've been asking about you ever since you told them I moved away. I thought I was protecting them from the conflict. You were protecting yourself from facing what you'd done. David set the letters down carefully, as if they were made of glass. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Do you think I can change? Do you think I can become the man they need me to be? I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw past the addiction, past the lies, past the pride that had driven him to this moment. I saw the boy who had once built blanket forts with me, who had cried when he accidentally stepped on a butterfly, who had promised his dying mother he would take care of me. David, I think you're the only one who can answer that question. But I know this. You can't change for Emma, or for the children, or for me. You have to change because you decide you're worth saving. What if I fail? Then you fail honestly, with people who love you helping you try again. David was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, steadier somehow. I want to try the residential program my counselor recommended, 30 days of intensive treatment for gambling addiction, but I can't afford it without the family fund. This was the moment Sarah had prepared me for in her final letter, the moment when love and boundaries would either work together or cancel each other out. David, I'll cover the treatment costs. But when you come out, you start over completely. No access to trading accounts, no borrowing against assets, complete financial transparency with Emma and with me. And if I complete the program? Then we rebuild the family fund support gradually with oversight and accountability. And if I don't? I thought about Tommy's letter, about Lucy's drawing, about Emma's courage in protecting her children. Then you face the consequences of your choices, but you won't face them alone. David nodded, wiping his eyes. I need to call Emma. I need to tell her about the program. David? He turned back to me. "Your children think I moved away. When you talk to Emma, ask her if I can come say hello to them. I miss my grandchildren." For the first time in months, David smiled. "They've missed you too, Dad, more than you know." 6 months later, I was standing in David's kitchen watching my grandson Tommy flip pancakes with the intense concentration of a surgeon. Lucy sat at the counter, carefully arranging blueberries into smiley faces on her plate. These Saturday morning breakfasts had become our new tradition, one that felt more precious because it had been lost and found again. "Grandpa Walter, look, I made a happy pancake." Lucy held up her creation with pride. "That's the most beautiful pancake I've ever seen," I told her, and meant it. After 2 months of thinking I had been erased from their lives, even burned pancakes would have looked perfect to me. David emerged from his home office carrying a manila folder that had become as much a part of our Saturday routine as the pancakes. Inside were his weekly financial statements, expense reports, and updates from his gambling addiction counselor. Complete transparency, as we had agreed. "How are we looking this week, son?" "Good. Actually, really good." He sat down across from me, opening the folder with none of the shame or reluctance I had seen in the early weeks. "I've been debt-free for 4 months now. The emergency fund is up to $8,000, and Emma and I are both contributing to the kids' college accounts again." Emma walked in from the backyard, her arms full of flowers from the garden she had started as part of what she called her rebuilding therapy. She kissed David's cheek and smiled at me with genuine warmth. "Walter, I have news. I got the promotion at school, department head starting in the fall." "Emma, that's wonderful. Congratulations. It means we'll be truly independent by Christmas this year. No more family fun needed." She paused, looking between David and me. "Unless you want to keep it for emergencies?" I had been preparing for this conversation. The family fund had always been meant as temporary support, not permanent dependency. "I think we should transition to something different. A family emergency fund that we all contribute to, including you and David." David nodded enthusiastically. "I've been thinking about that too. Maybe something the kids can learn from. See how families support each other." It was remarkable how different he looked now. The desperate edge was gone from his eyes. His shoulders no longer carried the tension of someone hiding secrets. The 30-day residential program had been followed by 6 months of weekly counseling, financial planning sessions, and what David called radical honesty practice. Tommy finished his pancake masterpiece and brought it to the table. "Grandpa, tell us the story about Grandma Sarah and the bird." It had become their favorite story, how Sarah used to leave breadcrumbs for an injured cardinal that visited our backyard every winter. The bird eventually healed and brought its mate, then its babies, creating a whole family of cardinals that still visited my feeder. "Well," I began, settling into the familiar rhythm of the tale, "your grandmother believed that when you help someone heal, they don't just get better. They bring healing to others, too." Lucy climbed onto my lap. "Like how you helped Daddy heal, and then Daddy helped Mommy heal? The wisdom of children never ceased to amaze me." "Something like that, sweetheart." After breakfast, as we cleaned up together, David pulled me aside. "Dad, I want to show you something." He led me to his office and opened his laptop to a document titled Family Financial Charter, Second Generation. "Emma and I have been working on this. We want to teach Tommy and Lucy about money the way you and Mom taught me, or tried to teach me before I lost my way." The document was beautifully organized, with sections on earning, saving, sharing, and spending responsibly. It included age-appropriate allowance structures, charity giving requirements, and transparency principles. "David, this is impressive. Sarah would be so proud." "There's something else." He scrolled down to the bottom of the document. "We want to establish a new tradition. Annual family financial meetings where everyone shares their goals and challenges, even the kids, with age-appropriate participation. When would you want to start?" "Christmas Day. Make it part of our holiday tradition." a way to honor Mom's belief in financial transparency. The irony wasn't lost on me. Christmas, the holiday that had started this entire crisis, would now become a celebration of the values we had almost lost. Later that afternoon, as I was preparing to leave, Tommy ran up to me with a handmade card. "For you, Grandpa, for Father's Day." Inside, in his careful 8-year-old handwriting, he had written, "Thank you for teaching Daddy how to be brave enough to tell the truth." I had to sit down for a moment, overwhelmed by the simple wisdom of those words. That evening, I sat in Sarah's chair and opened the last envelope she had left for me. This one was labeled, "When the Healing is Complete." "My dearest Walter," it began, "if you're reading this, David has found his way back to the man I always knew he could be. You've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their choices. But you've also learned that consequences and abandonment are not the same thing. The family fund was never about the money. It was about teaching David that support comes with responsibility, that love includes accountability, and that sometimes we have to lose what we take for granted before we can truly appreciate it. You didn't fail as a father when David lost his way. You succeeded as a father when you loved him enough to help him find it again. The cardinals are still coming to our feeder, aren't they? That's how I'll know you're both healing, when the birds return to trust." I looked out the window at the feeder, where a family of cardinals was settling in for their evening meal. 3 generations of birds, just like 3 generations of our family, learning to trust again. Christmas came early that year, not in December, but in the quiet moments of a Saturday morning when my grandson made me a happy pancake and my son showed me a document proving that wisdom could survive mistakes, that love could outlast pride, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to earn their way back into your heart. The story wasn't about the money after all. It was about what money represented: respect, acknowledgement, and the simple truth that the best family traditions aren't the ones we inherit, but the ones we choose to rebuild, together with transparency and love. And on those Saturday mornings, with pancakes burning and children laughing and honest conversations flowing as freely as maple syrup, I knew Sarah was right about everything, including the cardinals.